So, having now gotten deeper into the introductory information about execution and Fullbring, Ichigo has chosen to let the group help him get his Soul Reaper powers back so they can transfer their own power into him. With just the basics of all of this new lore in hand, we are moving into seeing some of it really put into action now. Because once Ichigo decides to accept Execution's help, we shift into a new kind of training for him with these different characters trying to have him bring out his Fullbring abilities, which will apparently help to recover his Soul Reaper powers. And the way they go about it is unorthodox. Yeah, kind of hilariously unorthodox, and I love this kind of thing. This is the Piccolo school of training. We are gonna put someone in a situation that they are not remotely prepared for, forcing them to grow to survive. But Piccolo never used giant murderous pig plushies that are apparently Yakuza members. Yeah, that's a thing, and it's wonderful. So let's get into it. Ruruka begins Ichigo's training with a dollhouse. Her Fullbring power is that she can put people in and out of things that she loves, so she puts Ichigo into the house, literally shrinking him down. His reaction to all of this is pretty great, because while he's dealt with a whole lot of different abilities throughout the course of the series, he's never dealt with anything quite like this before. The dollhouse itself is kind of terrifying, honestly. It awoke a small part of my childhood memories that was watching those creepy Pokemon episodes with the psychic girl and the dollhouse and all of that. I haven't seen it in a very long time, but my vague recollections are the stuff of nightmares, so it was and made me a little uncomfy. But speaking of uncomfortable nightmares, the plush pig, Mr. Pork, was also wonderfully terrifying. I was living for seeing Ichigo have to confront it, and it turns out he's not even actually originally a pig plushie, but like I said, is a Yakuza member. He's a gangster that Ruruka trapped inside of the doll. Yeah, it's kind of heroic that she, is punishing a criminal in a way, but it's pretty disturbing. Otherwise it's also innocent and childlike and colorful looking, but much darker than it appears on the surface, and shows a much more hostile way of Ruruka using her Fullbring. She isn't just able to provide people a weird place to get some training in, she can punish people in a pretty deranged way too. Like, this is pretty messed up, and every horrific panel of Mr. Pork, amazing name by the way, every horrific panel of him attacking Ichigo had me dying. It was so funny to see Ichigo confronted by that. Like, he's fought a lot of things, he hasn't fought that. And it was scary for him, for me, I'm sure for the Yakuza member, all around. Terrifying. Still, I've gotta think that we may have missed out on the greatest fight in Bleach between Cone and Mr. Pork, which is just another reminder for me that my beloved Cone is MIA. And also Mr. Pork transformed, and that was also just very disturbing. It just added on to all of the horror of this whole situation. But yeah, so the training apparently isn't meant to immediately bring back Ichigo's Soul Reaper powers, but is instead meant to activate his Fullbring. I did have a question here in my notes about this. It was established before that people get Fullbrings if their parents were attacked by hollows prior to their birth, but now that it's confirmed that Ichigo does have one, this means either his mom was attacked sometime before the eventual Grand Fisher attack that happened after Ichigo's birth, or that Isshin was attacked before, right? And being a Soul Reaper, I guess being attacked by a hollow isn't exactly out of the question. Like, it's actually probably pretty likely. Maybe that's all it is, and that Isshin fighting hollows is what led to Ichigo having a potential Fullbring, I guess? I just took note of that if Ichigo has a Fullbring, apparently that means his parents were attacked before he was born. So I assume it's from Isshin. But maybe Ichigo, being a hybrid Soul Reaper human, naturally gives him a Fullbring. I don't know. It's interesting though, because some of these people in Execution have apparently had these powers their whole lives, while people like Chad, Orihime, and now Ichigo didn't activate these Fullbrings until much later in life. So I'm curious about what exactly brings out a Fullbring. As far as we know, their parents weren't attacked by hollows before they were born. Like, they could have been, but we haven't got that confirmed. They've obviously all been attacked by hollows in recent years, and it's worth noting that Chad and Orihime's powers seem to really come out when they were fighting hollows, those first times in the early chapters when they first started using their abilities. So maybe there's something there. Maybe the Hogyaku counted that as close enough? I don't know. And maybe we'll find out more of these terms later, but this is just me trying to process all of this and make sense of it and how it fits into what we've seen so far. So I assume Ichigo, Chad, and Orihime's parents were all attacked, but maybe there are ways to get a full bring that don't require that, and that, the Hogyaku might have messed with things, or who knows. I also really liked the revelation that your specific fullbring abilities can be applied to many objects and not always just limited to the one that you have a strong connection with. Like, yeah, you can mess with the souls of objects near you. Ginjo talked about how that's how they propel themselves off of the ground, or can walk on water, and we saw him do that with the drink. But the specific abilities, their stronger, more personal abilities, usually seem connected to one item, like Ginjo's necklace, but Ruruka doesn't seem to be really limited to one particular item because of how many items she loves or has an attachment to, like her stuffed animals or her dollhouse. She seems to be able to use her powers in a more wide array of things because she cares about so many material things. Her perspective that Fullbring by its nature is the power of love is a fascinating one, and not entirely wrong it seems, though Ichigo deduces that it doesn't have to be love so much as it needs to be a sentimental, personal connection with an item. There just needs to be a strong attachment. There has to be some emotional tissue there that's tethering you to it, but more on that in a bit. The setup for this training session also allowed us to get a look at Giriko's Fullbring abilities, as well as more about what kind of person he is too. It turns out that our resident execution butler has timer powers. Not really stopping time or traveling through time or anything like that so far. No, specifically timer powers, where he can put a timer on specific things, and the timer has absolute conditions that need to be adhered to. He can also apparently make it so specific things happen at specific times, but until the timer is out, or the conditions that he created the timer with are met, in this case, Ichigo activating his Fullbring, if any of his conditions are broken or anyone tries to mess with them, it'll destroy everything that it's, connected to, which is crazy, and here I thought his Fullbring would be his ultimate eye. These powers make sense aesthetically for a guy that seems like a butler, bartender, assistant, attendant kind of guy. Timing is important for things like cooking or finding the perfectly aged wine. It just seems fitting for Giriko that his powers would be all about time management, and it gives us a proper glimpse of his personality too. He's very pragmatic and speaks in absolutes because, like time itself, his decisions are already set and they apparently can't really be altered. He's one of those people where he's decided something's happening one way, it seems like it's hard to convince him to change that. And all of his talk about a god of time is definitely interesting, and I suppose plenty of cosmic things are possible in the Bleach universe, but I think it's more likely, and I think more intriguing in a way, if Giriko simply believes that his own power belongs to a higher being. He just believes that it's this god of time punishing, people that break his rules, whereas it's really probably just Giriko's own power, I imagine. Maybe it's like in Game of Thrones, where honestly I sometimes felt that all of the Lord of Light business was just his worshippers' way of rationalizing their own magic, that there wasn't some divine power, but instead was the will of the ones that were performing the rituals, and what they really wanted, and their own inherent, innate, sometimes unconscious magic. That's still debatable. That show never gave us a definitive answer, but that's kind of how I'm feeling about Giriko right now. So there might not be any god of time at all, but Giriko's belief helps him to disassociate from how his powers might affect others. He's not letting these people burn alive. The god of time is punishing them. Apparently his powers have killed some others before, and he doesn't seem to feel remotely bad about it or empathetic that he placed those same potentially deadly conditions on Ichigo. It's not something he seems to feel bad about. It just is what it is, and it's already done, so that's how it has to be. That's kind of how he views things. The whole timer ability in general, which is apparently connected to a pocket watch that's attachment for his Fullbring, it's pretty crazy, and I'm really interested in seeing how it's used in other situations, especially in combat. How would it be utilized? I would imagine you wouldn't want to be in a room against him where he can change the settings of your surroundings to his turn. arms. Though Yuriko talks about how he can also be punished by it, like he gets affected by it too, which reminds me a little bit of Shunsui's Shikai, where he's under the same conditions that his power creates as his opponent. So maybe it's something like that. In general, the focus on humans gaining these supernatural powers also reminds me once again of the Chapter Black arc in Yu Yu Hakusho. I love when the paranormal side of a series like this bleeds over into the human world in new ways. In Yu Yu Hakusho, humans started gaining all of these various psychic abilities where they could affect the world around them to certain extents. With their so-called territories, a doctor could make people in his territory sick with any illness, which is my favorite episode of the series, by the way, and a boy could trap people in a game show. Things like that, and I love how this is giving me those same vibes, where the supernatural world that's usually been mostly kept secret has followed us back into the human world on a larger scale and given regular people more power than maybe they should have. We also did learn the other execution members' names. The woman is Jackie and the young man is Yukio, and Yukio notably seems very attached to his, what is that, a PSP of some kind? I don't know, but given everything we've been learning, I would bet that his fullbring is related to that device. Why else would Kubo show him attached to an object like this? So I hope he can summon pixelated video game characters to fight for him. That would be awesome. And him and Ruruka's relationship is funny. Definitely bickering siblings prodding at one another. I really liked that a lot. And as Ichigo struggled to activate his fullbring, he got some help from a worried Chad, who was always looking out for him. And I was curious last video about Chad's fullbring, and now we've got an answer. And honestly, I absolutely adore it. We learn that his fullbring doesn't come from an item like Ruruka's dolls or Yuriko's pocket watch. No, his is his skin, because of how much pride he feels towards his heritage and the color of his skin that makes him stand out from others. And I love that. That's why it's the skin of his arms that changes when he uses his powers. And while it's a bit broader than a specific item, I really like how it was applied in this way. It was clever and it was deep and it offered more insight into just, something that we've known about Chad, but to learn that his pride in his ancestors and where he comes from is so powerful that it literally manifests on him is really, really cool. And I haven't really brought this up much, if ever, before, but I've always really respected how Kubo incorporated Chad's background, and in general, how Kubo is very inclusive when it comes to people of color in the series. There are plenty of series where it isn't the case, and it's just something I've always respected while reading Bleach in particular. And I love that it's Chad that's helping kind of motivate and push Ichigo forward so far in his time with Execution. It was Chad's heart-to-heart that convinced Ichigo to accept their help, and it was Chad here helping him figure out how to activate his fullbring. It's nice that their closeness and their trust in one another is being focused on a bit again. It's been like a core of their friendship that they look out for one another, and while Ichigo and his trauma and his shifting life and dealing with everything kind of lost sight of Chad there for a bit, he didn't know about any of this, Chad getting Execution to try to help his friend shows that Chad never stopped looking out for Ichigo, especially in a time when Ichigo is so vulnerable, and I'm just glad to see it. I like their friendship, I'm glad it's got focus right here. And Ichigo's substitute badge being the key to unlocking his fullbring is fitting and actually kind of poetic and emotional. That badge is the last physical remnant he really has from his time as a Soul Reaper. He doesn't have his Zanpakuto, he doesn't have his robes, he doesn't have his Hollow Mask, he doesn't have his Soul Reaper buddies or even ghosts hanging around anymore. It's like there's very little evidence of the life that he'd been living, and the badge is a small bit of concrete proof that he experienced those things, that it was real, and that it was something he loved, and his journey was something he was proud of. Ichigo spent this arc so far trying to move forward into normalcy, kind of avoiding much thought about Soul Society and being a Soul Reaper, but now he takes a moment to really remember it, to allow himself to not just miss it, to not just be sad about it, to not feel helpless, but remember how being a Soul Reaper made him truly feel back then. It's not his attachment to the physical badge itself, as much as the badge represents what he really loved. Being a Soul Reaper, protecting people, being a hero. The badge is just a representation of all of that, of everything that he loved and took pride in, and it's that feeling and those emotions that finally activate his fullbring. It's a hell of a great moment. I loved it so much. It was hype, but I've gotta ask though. I've gotta ask. Being an American, I'm curious, how did this visual with the swastika play for people in the West? I know it's usually his Bankai's guard and it's on his hilt already, but this is a much larger and it's much more in your face, obviously, and by itself stands out more. It's huge. He's just throwing it around. I'm very aware that the swastika was a symbol predating the Third Reich that they hijacked, and I've been aware of that since I was a kid, but I've known plenty of people here in the US that don't know about the history of the symbol, and honestly would probably be furious or very uneasy if they saw this. Like, if I watched this as a kid and my friend's mom saw me watching this scene, she probably would have flipped out, to be perfectly honest. I'm just curious if that was controversial at all when it first happened. I did notice that they tweaked the design in the anime. Not a big deal, since I'm not ignorant enough to think that the symbol being used in this context means that Ichigo should be punched by Captain America. But I am curious about the response back then. Like, was there a backlash? Was there people for... I feel like hopefully people would know that this isn't like... Bleach isn't like Nazi propaganda because there's a swastika symbol being wielded by the hero, you know? I guess one thing I'm a little confused about, and maybe it's just because I haven't been given the full explanation yet, is the connection between Ichigo's Fullbring and his Soul Reaper powers. Like, why is it necessary to unlock his Fullbring, and how will that help him get back what he lost? I suppose activating his Fullbring is maybe to help reconnect him with the spiritual in general, maybe? Although we know that he does still have some spiritual pressure at the beginning of the arc. Ginjo brings up all of this info about the badge retaining the memories of Ichigo's battles, which is cool, and that alone might be the answer I'm looking for. Like, in some ways, maybe the badge is like a small backup file of Ichigo's residual Soul Reaper powers, and that's what'll help connect him to being a Soul Reaper again. So maybe it's like he's not really tapping into his own power like the other Fullbring characters, like their own souls, but instead the power that the badge remembers, maybe? Or maybe Ichigo, being a Soul Reaper since he's a hybrid, is just so ingrained into who he is that connecting with his soul and connecting with his Soul Reaper powers are essentially one and the same. I don't know. That's just my thoughts right now. I was a little confused about the connection, but maybe I figured that out just now. Maybe I've answered my own question. I don't know. But that's just something I was a little confused about when they made the distinction that he's trying to activate his Fullbring in this training, and he's not trying to get his Soul Reaper powers back. But it seems like it's kind of one and the same because of the way it feels like Getsuga Tensho's energy is kind of flowing through the badge. I don't know. Maybe I figured it out. Maybe it is one and the same in a way because of who Ichigo is. But I've got to point out that Ginjo knows so much about the substitute Soul Reaper badge, and he owns one. We've seen it in his bag, so it's still very possible that he was a substitute Soul Reaper himself. I think it's likely, but I'm still not sure that he's the, substitute Soul Reaper that had Fullbring powers transferred into him before. Just the way Kubo drew his expression here, it looks like a somber remembrance to me, and maybe even like a little nostalgia. I'm so curious. Anyway, Ichigo gets his first real victory here by starting to learn how to harness his Fullbring and is finally allowed out of the creepy dollhouse, and so is Mr. Pork. But then something really weird happens. Ichigo hears a voice coming from his Soul Reaper badge, and apparently it's most likely Rukia's. She says, "It's missing." Ichigo wouldn't, which isn't much to go off of whatsoever, but let's try to glean what we can from this. Alright, I'm just gonna take a guess. So what is she talking about? What is missing? Something from Soul Society? Did they realize that Ichigo still has the substitute badge? Maybe they sensed that it had been activated, and that's why she's saying Ichigo wouldn't? Or are they aware of execution, and they're saying, Ichigo wouldn't join execution? I don't know. Very curious. And I'm hoping maybe this leads to Rukia showing up, or, contacting her at least on a phone call. Also, last but certainly not least, Don Kanonji had a one-panel cameo on a TV screen, and I hope he's doing well after showing some real bravery against Aizen. I'm still so proud of him, and now he's back to just doing his thing, probably waiting for the next cataclysmic event where he can prove to be a real hero again. I wish he was a Fullbringer. Maybe he is. That would be awesome. We're gonna leave it there, as Orihime might be in some really, really serious trouble, but this is where I had to stop for the time being. but I'm sure we'll be able to get into that part of things next time based on where I'm leaving off because, uh-oh. As always, thanks so much for watching, everyone. Please comment, like, subscribe. If you want to support the channel a little bit extra, feel free to become a member. Yeah, I'll see you all soon. Special Valentine's Day video this week that's not related to Bleach, but instead toward American comic books about my favorite comic book couple. So, yeah, I'll see you all soon. Take care. Bye.